Join me today for a powerful story of turning pain to purpose. I have the honor of talking to Marisa Ferrera today. She's an empowerment coach and mentor working with people to get over struggle and conflict and drama in family relationships to calmly and powerfully speak up for themselves so they can create healthy, loving boundaries. She does it with so much love and so much grace. And I'm so excited for you to meet her. I got so moved today as she told her story. And if you are someone or know someone who's struggling to let go of pain in the past, pain in relationships, so that you can be free and live more fully today, Marisa really inspires some ideas for how you can do this without needing to change the other person in your life. She teaches many, many things. One of my favorite things that she teaches is how our triggers can be our greatest teachers. And we talk about that and so much more. Enjoy and be inspired to step more fully into your relationships and your life. I'm Carla Reeves, and this is Differently, a podcast where we explore the ins and outs of what becomes possible when we're willing to think, do, and show up differently to the moments of our everyday lives. Hey, Marisa, I'm so glad you're here. I am looking forward to diving into the work that you do because it's so vital. Relationships are so vital to every facet of our life and our being. And so welcome.
Thank you. Delighted to be here.
Yeah, so I would love to dive in first. I don't even know your story of why you do the work you do. And I'm just always intrigued by people's stories. I know there's something meaningful to you, why you do the work you do today. So take us there.
Sure. Well, what got me started to doing this particular work, it actually came after a career in teaching, and I won't get into all of that because that's another story. But in terms of the work I do now that I'm really passionate about, it's because of my own background and my own history of dealing with and overcoming childhood abuse and trauma. And I had a lot of difficulties with relationships myself, obviously first in my family relationships because of what I was dealing with as a child and how it impacted me in a lot of ways in terms of, really being shut down and being afraid to speak, certainly not standing in my power, having no confidence and no self-esteem. And so over the years, as I started healing from all of that and recognizing the wounds that I had and how they were impacting my entire life in ways that weren't pleasant and that ways that were stopping me from really having the life and the relationships I wanted. I started to realize that, other people also deal with similar things. And I had people coming to me actually for advice because they had seen how my life had drastically changed. Even my youngest sister says she didn't recognize me from childhood because I was just like a wallflower, never spoke. And she just didn't recognize me as an adult because I was so different and a lot more vocal and in a loving way, because that's an important thing too. And we can get into that a little bit more later. But really, it was all about recognizing when we do overcome trauma and wounds from the past, it makes such a difference in our lives. And I just want to share that with other people that would like to experience the same joy in their lives and in their relationships.
Yeah, I love that. What was the pivot point for you where you knew you needed to do differently or heal, or like what set you on that path? Was there a moment?
There actually was, and that's a great question. You see, when I left home just before 18th birthday to go to college out of town. And I really believed that was going to change my life because I was going to a new city, a new school. Nobody was going to know me. So I thought I could make friends because that was one of my challenges in being so I was withdrawn and, without the self-confidence, I had a lot of difficulty making friends. So I was really sad and lonely throughout, high school. I wasn't one of those people going to parties or hanging out with people. I was alone a lot. And so I really saw this change of my life, starting a new school, starting in a new city as a new beginning. And so I really thought, this is it. It's going to change everything. And after my first
Mm.
year of college, nothing was different. I realized that I wasn't being asked, but I would, hear people getting together and going out to the movies or going out for dinner, and nobody was inviting me. So the summer between first and second year of college, I did some reflecting, and I thought, first of all, we go into the what's wrong with me, why doesn't anybody want to hang out with me? And I realized that I really had to start showing up differently. If I just kept on the
Mm.
way I was, nothing was going to change. And so I made a conscious decision, even though I was, like 19, not even 20 yet, that I wanted to do something different. And I was going to take the risk of asking people to join me to go to the movies or to go for dinner, because that was a really scary thing, because I knew, what if I ask and they say no? Then I'm going to be really devastated, right? But I thought, that what else can I do? If I go back and do the same thing, it's going to be the same, right? And this was all before I learned about, how the little quote about insanity. I didn't know any of that stuff back then, but I realized, that's
Yeah.
exactly what I was doing, right? So I did. I showed up the second year and I started asking different people to join me to go to the movies and for lunch or dinner on the weekends, and they did say yes. And I started making friends. So that was a real turning point for me. And from there, I went to counseling and started getting some help also with some of my wounds, and that set me on the path as well.
I think that's so important what you said, because, just the fact that you changed your environment, thinking something was going to change, like you were going to experience that bigger change. And I mean, when I work with clients, like that happens all the time. And I started to notice a long time ago that people were like escaping a situation or a relationship or a city and while their experience might change for a little bit, they would end up feeling the same old feelings, just like you described. And that really
Mm-hmm.
what we're wanting to escape is something within like a structure we've built within ourself that keeps us so confined and trapped. And it's such a beautiful example of that. And I love that there were just, in that instance, there was just a simple change that you made and you started to get new results and new evidence, right?
Yeah,
So
right
beautiful.
away. Right away. But it
Yes.
really is about being willing to take the risk, right? Because that's the scariest part, is doing something different. We don't know what's going to happen. And I love what you said in terms of relationships too, because it's so true, especially, in partnerships where, people say, they often end up with the same relationship with a different face, because we take our issues and our challenges with us. So just like me changing my environment didn't change anything, changing a relationship doesn't change anything either until you start working on yourself.
That's exactly right. It's like, oh yeah, there's a common denominator here. I was here and I'm here and
Exactly.
I'm here and I'm here. But sometimes we're blind to it. We don't see it.
Sure.
It
Sure.
can be very hard to see. Um, so one of the things I was really excited about, you talked about like triggers as teachers. And I think just the concept of relationships being, to me, it's like they're so vital to our well-being on every facet. I mean, when our relationships are working, especially our closest ones, everything works a little bit better. And those triggers are, kind of what take us out of that healthy state often. And
Hmm.
so I'd
Hmm.
love to hear you kind of speak to just triggers in general. What are they? How do we understand them better? Yeah, I'd love to hear your teaching on that.
Sure. I'm happy to share that, because it's a big part of the work that I do, as well as helping people really look at triggers from a different perspective. And I often talk about, how conflict can be an opportunity to heal and actually bring you closer together. And that's what, conflict
Mm,
is, because of our triggers. And many people will avoid, or when they feel triggered, they'll avoid dealing with it because they're afraid of the conflict and the drama that often follows. And so they'll just kind of sweep things under the rug. But as I think most of us know, that doesn't work in the long run, right? It just kind of drives us further and further apart. And so what I've discovered is that, our triggers, the way they're teachers, is because they teach us the areas in our lives that have not yet been healed.
mm,
Because when we're triggered, what it's doing is it's activating an unhealed wound from the past. And so that's really how it teaches us, what part of our past to take a look at or to heal from, so that we're not triggered in that way anymore. And we'll find that, oftentimes when we have unmet expectations, that's going to trigger something. And what we make things mean is a big part of it too, because we attach meaning to all the experiences that we have. And when you really look deeper, we recognize that the meaning we attach is based on our past and similar experiences and what we made it mean. And, as an example, for me, one of my biggest triggers, or one of my core wounds that I uncovered as I started, delving into looking at my triggers and what was going on for me, was a wound of feeling stupid, because that was what I grew up with. I did not feel very smart. I felt I was put down a lot, emotionally, psychologically. And so I felt stupid. So something could happen in my environment. Someone could say something to me and I would get triggered and angry and upset because I made it mean, you think I'm stupid, right? And that's not what they meant at all. Like, when,
Right.
now that I've, played around with stuff, I realized that, no, I made it all up. And so we make up the meaning based on our past. And so when we look at the teaching opportunity in our trigger, we can go back and unravel it and change the story around things so that it works for us in a more positive way.
It's so true. I often say to people I'm working with that as humans we are, and I heard this years and years ago, that as humans we're meaning making machines. I mean, we're so good at creating so much meaning around just one simple thing that happens. And
Yes.
You're right. Like, it often comes from something we decided a long time ago, that we were different or dumb or didn't belong or whatever it was. And it becomes like a lens. And then anything that's happening today, we're kind of filtering through that lens. And like you said, it has nothing to do with that. Doesn't have any, they didn't mean that at all, but we're interpret it through that filter that we had part in creating a long time ago. And you can change that. And I'm sure lots of stories, and even in your own life, of where shifting that changes everything.
And changing, our relationship with the people in our past that kind of I was going to say created those wounds or those stories that we made up, but it's more that the experiences we had with them caused us to create those stories. But when we change our
Yeah.
relationship to them, it changes things as well. And just as an example, for me, my biggest abuser was my father. He grew up in Italy. He was, very big, strong construction worker. And, being an immigrant to Canada, he wanted to make sure that his daughters, followed the straight and narrow path, because he thought, Canadians and, North Americans were a little bit too loose, especially girls. So, he's afraid that, we're going to end up with the drugs or the alcohol or get pregnant, as a teenager or whatever. So he was extremely strict. And so I, was brought up in a box, and he was very scary because he was very abusive physically as well. And so I lived in fear, every day of my life, because even though on one level I knew my father loved me because I knew he would die for me, but I also felt like he could kill me accidentally with his anger and rage because he had no way of controlling it.
Mm.
He didn't have any tools, for dealing with his own stress or his own unhealed wounds from the past. And so he would become, pretty violent. And later on in life, I learned that the way he acted was kind of like what they would describe as a dry drunk, because he wasn't an alcoholic, but he would act like a raging alcoholic when he became really angry. And I remember, for example, even, when I was like 5 or 6 years old, most of the arguments would start at the dinner table because he wasn't home during the day. He was working, right? And so we'd be together at dinner time, and there'd be, I could sense, I became very sensitive to energies at that time, because I could sense when my father's energy was starting to escalate and that it could get out of control. And so I would quietly, get out of my seat, and I would, walk around the dinner table and take all the knives off the table, because I was afraid that he might just grab one
Wow.
and whip it at one of us, and not thinking. Like, I believed he
Yeah.
would have remorse, but when someone's out of control, they don't think, right? It's a little too late. And so I would just hide them in a drawer somewhere. And so I was deathly afraid of him, to the point where even, I remember even when I was 10, praying that God would take him so that we could all be safe. And I had a hard time sharing that in the past, because there was some guilt and shame attached to even saying, like, how could I pray for my father to die? I mean, that sounds horrible. And yet, as a young child that was just terrified of him and what he could do to me and my sisters and my mom, that was the only thing I could think of, right? But then let's go back when I started, doing the healing work. And I was able to see my father as an innocent child that had absolutely no idea what he was doing. He wasn't acting from from being unloving, although it's a very unloving act. He didn't know any better. And so when I was able to change the story around it and recognize that he was also abused, but he didn't have the education or the tools that I had to do anything about it, so he just projected it all, onto me and the rest of my family, I was able to forgive him and release all of it. And forgiveness is a big part of also dealing with our triggers. And people have difficulty with forgiveness because they really think that we're saying, oh, then it was okay what they did. We're
what
letting
you did
people
was
off
okay,
the hook, right? But that's not it at all. It's not that I said I never accepted that it was okay. I just was able to understand it from a different lens, from a different perspective that freed me. Because when we don't, because I wasn't carrying around that pain anymore. Like I couldn't talk about my past in my early young adult years without, bursting into tears. I mean, it was just so traumatic that I couldn't talk about it. Even I remember when I was starting to date and I'd start sharing you start to get to know each other and you talk about your past. I couldn't talk without crying because it was so painful. And so the forgiveness work really healed me to be able to talk about it in a way that was more empowering, to be able to help other people as well. So I don't know if that answered your question, but that's part of what I think is really important is the forgiveness work.
I don't remember what the question was, but I love what you're saying. I think it's fascinating. And I think that so many of us and so many people I've worked with and in my own life, we carry around these things and often we keep them kind of in a dark, quiet room, where we don't share them or we're not comfortable sharing them. And I think that just the more light and air that you can breathe into that space, just the better. Because, and I think that some of our greatest gifts and strengths come from the most painful parts of our life. And if you can't look at the pain and give it light and air, you may never find the gifts. And I mean, I can already see just you talking like some of your gifts that come from that, and yeah.
No, it's true. It's true. I feel that for me, it's really helped me have a lot of compassion for people that do horrendous things, because I can look past their actions, right? Because our actions don't really determine who we are. It's who we've become because of our own pain and suffering. And again, not to condone the horrific acts that people, do to each other. I would never condone it. But when we can understand it, then we can bring love and healing and compassion to it, which frees us and them. Otherwise, we just keep carrying the pain with us forever.
Well, and we make it mean their behavior means something about us. And most of the time, I don't know what you think, but it's not about us. It's really about them and their own journey and their own pain and their own lens and their own, so I think when we can recognize that, you talk a lot about staying in your power, and I think we can stay in who we are and not lose our identity in the face of somebody that's difficult to deal with or behaves in a way. And that doesn't mean we necessarily always tolerate it. And I don't know what your teaching is around that, but maybe you want to share something about that.
Sure. Because that's also a big part of what I do, is because learning about our triggers and our wounds and healing from them is one part, but then what we need to do with that is to create healthy boundaries. And it's difficult some people will create boundaries from a place of anger and resentment, like when they feel like, okay, that's it, I've had enough, you're not going to treat me like this anymore, and they come at it with this energy of, it's a negative energy, right? And that doesn't really work either, because that energy is inside of them that they're carrying. So I like to teach my clients how they can heal from their wounds, go through the forgiveness process, and then be able to create boundaries from a place of love, and be able to express it from a place of love, and to know what to do if others do not honor their boundaries, because that's where you need to decide, and it's difficult, with family relationships especially, and that's why I deal with that primarily, because once we can manage our family relationships, it's a lot easier to handle, business relationships or friends, right? The family's the toughest, because we feel like we have an obligation to our family that we can't leave them. I mean, they're our family. Or people do leave, but like I said, they slam the door shut, and I'd say, I don't want you in my life. I'm not going to let you treat me this way.
All or nothing.
Exactly. And sometimes we do need to let family members go. But wouldn't it be nice if, instead of slamming the door in their face and saying, that's it, you're not treating me like this anymore, I want nothing to do with you, but leaving it with anger. And now you live your life without the family member, but that anger is still in you, affecting your physical body, your emotional state, your other everything, right? But if you can come to that place where you can say lovingly to a family member, it's not okay for you to talk to me this way, or to treat me disrespectfully, or to be abusive. So unless you're willing to change the way you are with me, I'm going to have to end this relationship. And I want you to know that the door is always open if and when you're ready to show up in a way that honors who I am. That's taking a stand, but from a place of love. And then you close the door, because sometimes you do have to do that. If you're in a, narcissistic relationship or an abusive one, and the person's not capable or ready to shift in their own life, then that's where it's important to walk away, but with sending them love, not with, not with anger and saying, resentment, because then that energy just comes back to you.
It's so powerful. I mean, just you saying that in that way, like you can just feel, the difference of, and yeah, it can feel scary to do that. And I think
it is.
A lot of times I talk with clients about, some patterns we have kind of put up with or made okay for a really long time. And I will say to people, like, it may have been okay for you, like, to do that for a long time, but it's not they feel like it's not okay anymore. And sometimes we have to teach the people in our life how to be in relationship with us now. And we can own, for a long time, I made this okay, or I put up with this, and I own that, but it's not okay anymore.
Exactly.
And something has to shift.
Because we do teach people how to treat us. We do, like you said, we teach them how to treat us. And it is important to let people know when you've made a new decision. And that's another important part, is looking at the role that you've been playing in your family. Because I was the peacekeeper and the quiet one. I never stood up. I never spoke up. And so, that's what people expect from you. So when you start to change your role, it's like a dance, right? When you're dancing with somebody and you start changing the dance step, you step on each other's toes. The same thing's going to happen. It can be really awkward and create conflict and drama, because the family members want you in your place, because they don't want to change, right? And so you're creating a change just by you changing. And so the dynamic doesn't work anymore. So they're going to try to put you back in your, in your little box. And so that's why the healing work is important first, because people try to create the boundaries first, but then they get knocked off and get thrown back as soon as they're confronted, because they've got the woundedness, the inner child comes out again, and the fear and the insecurity and the curling up in a ball in the corner. But when you've healed from it, they can throw anything at you, and you can actually stand in your power, and it doesn't hurt you. And it just made me think of another story, if I can share, that actually happened with my father, who, like I said, I was terrified of. And this was when I was I think 40 years old. Okay. And I had been in a relationship with someone that we'd been living together, and we decided we weren't going to get married, because both of us had been married before and didn't feel we needed kind of the legality of it all. It didn't mean anything to us, but we wanted to have a celebration of our commitment to each other. So we decided to create a love and commitment ceremony. And it was going to be kind of like a wedding, with our closest friends and family. And we were going to do vows and everything, but none of the legal stuff. It was just going to be very spiritual and we were just really excited about it. Well, my father was not happy about this decision, okay? And so when we went to talk to, when I went home, to let my parents know about this decision we made, and of course we were inviting them. Well, he went on to his soapbox and he started verbally attacking me, and he was going up one side of me and down the other and criticizing me, throwing all this negative stuff at me. And I did not feel scared. I did not feel disempowered. I did not feel hurt. I could just see his concern, his fear that if I don't get married, I might be on the street one day with nothing. I just knew it was all coming from his love. I mean, it sounds distorted because he's being really nasty, right? But the whole time he was lashing out at me, I was psychically or energetically sending him love. I just kept sending him loving messages like, it's okay, Dad. I love you, Dad. Everything's fine, Dad. I'm going to be fine. I'm not, of course, saying this verbally because he wouldn't understand, but I'm just the whole time I'm saying this. And then at one point he looks at me and he says, I don't want to hurt you, but, and I looked him straight in the eyes and I said, it's okay, Dad. You can't hurt me anymore. And there was like silence, it was like, because I was saying it from love, but I was like, I didn't, and it wasn't like I put up a wall that you can't hurt me because I've got this brick wall in front of me that you are not going to penetrate ever again. It was totally from love. And that totally shifted our relationship. And I call him my husband because I don't know what else to call him, but he told me later that he'd never seen my father like that ever. I mean, he heard me talk about my past because I shared that with him, but he'd never seen that. And he said he was afraid that he was going to have to step in and protect me physically. And he's like very small, thin. My dad, like I said, is a big man, but he was like on the edge of his seat thinking he was going to have to step in. And I wasn't afraid that was going to happen, not for one moment. And so that is the power of doing your own work, taking responsibility for your own triggers, and again, using them as your teachers to guide you, to your own healing path and to forgiveness, and just totally creating a new relationship to the point that when my father was diagnosed many years later in 2015 with a terminal, rapidly growing cancer, within a week, my husband and I packed up our bags from Colombia and we were back in Canada, and I was one of his primary caregivers for the last 2 months of his life. And I did that with love. It wasn't like, oh, great, now we got to go back to Canada. I got to look after my dad, because that's what a good daughter does, especially an Italian one, right? Family is everything. It wasn't from that. And it would have been if I hadn't done the work. I still would have gone back, but I would have been resenting every moment of it. Instead, I was there and so grateful to have that time with him. So it's a huge, huge shift from praying that he would die to being there with him the last 2 months of his life. It was beautiful.
Wow, it's so powerful. You guys can't see her, but I can. And wow, I just got really moved by that whole story. And there's so much love in your presence. Like, I just feel it. I see it in your face, and it's beautiful. So I'm curious, like, when in that moment with your dad and you just feeling love for him and saying, you can't hurt me anymore, was there a shift in him after that?
Well, that's interesting. That's a whole other story that I have actually never shared before, but I will share with you here and with whoever's listening. There was a shift, but there was a time after that where my father actually sort of disowned me in an indirect way. He was very confronted by my stand, not so much that I told him he couldn't hurt me anymore, but just the fact that I was going to go ahead with this love and commitment ceremony and not get married. Because again, I was the quiet girl. I was the one that always went along right? I never confronted my father
Followed
growing
his
up.
rules.
And
Yeah.
so this was, it's like, he just never expected this from me. So because I went ahead with the ceremony, which of course he didn't come to, and he said he wasn't going to come. And I said, that's okay. I said again from love when he was saying, well, I'm not going to come if your mother wants to go. I said, that's okay, Dad. I said, you have to do what's right for you, and I'm going to do what's right for me. That's it's like I could honor and respect his choice, and I was going to honor and respect mine. I wasn't going to give in to him like I would have in the past because of fear, right? And so he didn't come. And then later, I found out. I called my parents home one day, and they called me. I found out that, okay, like I said, I have never shared this before, so you can tell I'm a little bit. I don't know if it's nervous. I guess there is a little discomfort because it's the first time I'm ever sharing this like publicly.
Yeah.
And I've got, sometimes I worry about other family members that are still obviously around and what they're going to think about what I share publicly. But I also think it's important because for people to understand just the process, it doesn't always go smoothly. But long story short, I found out that my father did end up in the psych ward because he was going to attempt suicide. My sister woke up in the middle of the night. She was home at that time, and she saw like a rope in the tree. And so he ended up in the psych ward. And then when he came out and he was home, when I called and he answered, which my father would never normally answer the phone because he's hard of hearing, as soon as he heard my voice, he hung up. And at first I thought, did we get disconnected or what happened? So I called right back, and he said, hello, is this Linda, which is my younger sister? And I said, no, it's Marisa. And he hung up again. So then I found out later that, he had a lot of stuff that was coming up around me, and anger and different things. And he was, processing it. And so again, I knew he needed his space. And so I would send him emails because, I had set him up with a tablet years before and taught him all this stuff. And so, I sent him emails, and just whenever we'd be going close to town, because my husband's family is near my family, an hour apart, and we'd usually visit them both the same weekends. I would let them know, if we're welcome to visit, I'd love to see you. If not, that's okay. So I kept the door open, and I told Randy, my husband, I don't think we're going to be spending Christmas, because this happened in August. I said, I don't think we're going to spend Christmas together this year, because I knew my dad can be one that can hold grudges for a really long time. Like, he's disowned people for years, including my older sister once for like 2 years. But again, I wasn't hurt by it. I understood. I thought, he's got stuff coming up. He's got pain he's dealing with, and it's not about me. Kind of what you said earlier. I didn't make it about me because I knew it wasn't about me. I felt sorry for him. I had compassion and wished he wasn't going through all this, but it was his process, and he needed to go through it. And so as it turned out, we were home for Thanksgiving in October, and things started to change from there. And what's really interesting is I learned what was really at the core of what happened with my dad's upset. It had nothing to do with the ceremony or anything, because he said something that I'll never forget. He didn't even realize he said it, which is really interesting. What he said was, he said something about how my mother never stood up to her father for him. And he never referred it back to that I was he kind of looked at what I did as standing up for Randy to him. He didn't link the two, but in his story, because he liked to talk, and go on, that came out. And I thought, that's what this was about. It was his own anger that, because my mother, they were chaperoned when they were dating. We're talking Italians here, right? Like in Canada. So my dad was never alone with my mother until they got married. And so I think a lot of stuff came up for him around that. But I really believe it's because of the love that I kept sending him, and the non-judgment, and just the understanding that gave him the space to be able to heal enough to recreate a relationship with me that was a lot more respectful and honoring. So yes, it did shift the relationship, but that was a several month process.
It took time.
Right? It took a few months, but it was worth it.
Wow. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think it's so true. I think it isn't always, you can't always tie it up in a bow quickly,
No,
right? And
no.
sometimes you can never tie it up in a bow. But I remember my mom, like I remember being in my like late 20s, and I too had kind of always lived my life according to what I thought my parents wanted and what she
Mhm.
wanted, and I was a good girl and followed all the rules and all of that. And I
Mhm.
got to a point in my late 20s after having been divorced, um, of like realizing that I had to do some things differently and it didn't look like she did it. And I
Mhm.
remember going toe to toe with her a few times, like in a really loving way. But I know this looks different for you, for me, Mom, than it did for you. But I want you to know, I just reassured her, I'm okay. I'm still a good girl. I'm not doing anything wrong. And it's important. It was around having girlfriends and going out with girlfriends and spending time with my friends and not always my partner.
Mhm.
And that made her uncomfortable. And
Mhm.
she, it was coming from love and her desire to keep me safe and make sure I follow the right path. And I required a lot of love and a lot of reassurance. But doing that and going toe to toe with her, it did take a little while. But ultimately, we had a much more authentic relationship.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
wouldn't trade that for anything.
And that's the beauty, when you start to show up authentically, it gives other people that you're with the space and they feel permission to be authentic with you. And we need to be ready for that because they might start sharing some
Mhm.
truths that might not be comfortable for us to hear, right?
Yeah.
It works both
So how
ways.
do you help? Yeah. How do you help people through the discomfort part, of being brave and being bold and walking through some stuff that, feels a little messy and a little hard and a little makes our heart go fast?
Well, part of the coaching that I do, I include a program that I put together on creating healthy boundaries, and there's a lot of um, there's videos and tools in there to help them uncover core wounds and then heal from them, and then create the boundaries, and then we talk in between with private coaching where they can ask all the questions about what are the things that, how their specific situations, because everyone has different
Yes.
fears and different anxieties around things. And if there's a specific conversation that they want to have, then we can look at what are they afraid might come up from the other person? What do you think they might say that they aren't sure how to respond? And that's one of my gifts that I realized I had through other people telling me, is that I just have this ability to, the words just come through in terms of how to respond and not react, because reactions are coming from
Mhm.
triggers and from pain. But when we respond, that's when you're coming from love. And so I record all the sessions because initially people were like, wait a minute, what did you just say? I want to write that down.
Right.
And
And
I'm like, I
sometimes you
don't
can't
remember.
remember,
I
right?
don't remember. It just comes out,
Yeah.
right? And so it's hard until I know specifically what people's challenges are, but then I help them look at how they can communicate again from love. And one of the main things is to just, in terms of a tip, is to always validate what the other person says before you share
Mhm.
anything. Is validate, because when somebody feels validated, they open up and are better able to hear what you have to say. If you just respond to something somebody says to you with your viewpoint or your perception or your disagreement or whatever, then they just come back with, and it goes back and forth. It becomes like a little war. But if you can validate and say, well, if I understand correctly, what I'm hearing you say is blah, blah, blah. And then they're like, yeah, you get me. Now, that doesn't mean you agree with them, right? Because once they
Right.
understand that you get them, then you can say, so, okay, so I understand that this is, what you're thinking. But the way I experience it is, and then you express how you experience it. And those are some powerful words also in conversations, is to
Mhm.
always use the words, my experience is, instead of you make me feel whatever, right? Same,
Yeah, it immediately puts
I
people
feel
on the
this way.
defensive.
Exactly. When you start pointing fingers, they can't hear you anymore because now they're thinking about all the stuff they got to tell you to defend themselves that they're innocent because nobody wants to feel guilty,
So
right?
true.
So, yeah. So instead of saying, well, you made me feel this because you did this or you did that, you can just say, well, it's been my experience that when I'm with you, I feel that, and fill in the blank. Or it's been my experience that every time we get together, X happens.
This
Instead
happens.
of you make this happen, right? And you can say,
I
I'd
love
like
that.
to create an opportunity for us to have a more positive experience together or a more loving experience together. So there are different ways that you can approach the conversation, but validating whatever somebody says, even if you don't agree, is okay. You can understand how somebody feels, even if you don't agree with them. Because if you understand that they're only speaking from their experience and from their understanding, then I can understand that, even if it's completely opposite to what I believe.
I love that. And I think, it makes complete sense. And I think that's where communication just gets so messy. And there's what you're talking about just really cleans up communication and creates an opportunity instead of a fight. And,
exactly. Exactly.
Because you're right. Anytime you go in with the word you, or you've done this, or you make me feel this way, you're right. When you said, they can't even hear what you're saying because they're already preparing to defend. I've done that in my marriage.
We all do.
Here, it's like you immediately go to, well, that's ridiculous. That's not what I meant, and this is why. And
exactly, we all do it. But we've not been taught how to communicate. I mean, that was not part of the curriculum. I used to be a school teacher. Okay, it was not part of the curriculum. I added it to the curriculum actually when I was teaching. I started throwing in communication skills and how to deal with conflict because I understood how valuable and important it was, but it was not part of the curriculum. I just added it.
I love that. There are lots of things we need to add to the curriculum, I think, for life.
Yes, that's true.
But talk a little bit about just how these moments are opportunities, because when you said triggers are teachers, and there's just such an open door there to look at this differently and to see an opportunity inside of something that feels scary or uncomfortable that we tend to want to run away from. And how can we run to that, and what's available when we do?
Sure. Well, once we recognize that the trigger is not a bad thing, and we see it as a gift. Like if you again put on a different set of lenses, right? If we look at triggers as a gift, then, like, for example, now when I used to get triggered like everybody else, I would run away from it and avoid it and everything else. But now when I get triggered, I see it as a gift, and I'm grateful for it because I go, wow, here's something that I thought I had healed, but another layer is coming up, because obviously we heal in layers. It's like, especially the deeper the wound, the more layers that we need to heal from, right? And we know how deep a wound is by the degree of the trigger reaction, right? Because we react in different degrees. It's not always the same intensity. So I know how deep my wound is based on the reaction I just had. So now when I react to something or to someone, because it can be a situation that causes a trigger too, not even a conversation. So some event can happen in your life that triggers upset. So even that's a teacher, because I can look at it and go, oh, okay, so what's coming up for me? And I look deeper. So that's the biggest thing, is to look at what is coming up. And even in my relationship, I mean, Randy and I both understand all this. And that's why I think our relationship is so amazing for like 20 years now, is because we take responsibility for our triggers. And so if I react to him, I'll go, oh, I'm sorry, I'm reacting.
Something's happening
it's
here.
my stuff. There's something, and it's me. It's like, yes, he was the catalyst, right? But he's the catalyst that's giving me the opportunity to heal something on another level. So that's where the gift is. And it's, you don't always want to see it, because sometimes when we get triggered, I don't know how much time we have, but this is another topic. When we get triggered, we go into a child state. We're no longer in an adult body. Like, we're in an adult body, but a child mind state. And that's why you'll often hear people say, stop acting like a child. Well, when you're in a triggered state, you can't stop acting
You
like a
are
child.
acting
It's
like
too
a
late.
child.
It's too late. But telling somebody that isn't going to help them, right? And so we have an agreement, my husband and I, is that when one of us goes into child state, the other one needs to take responsibility and remain the adult. Because see, what happens is when you're triggered and you react, you trigger the other person wounds, and then they react, and that's why it goes back and forth, and you go it just goes from bad to worse, right? It goes from a little problem to an explosion. People wonder how did we started with this, and how did it end up, like with this huge raging fire? Well, it's because the triggers are going back and forth, and you're both in child state. And until someone steps
can
into
stop
adult, and then you put your child aside temporarily. It's not about ignoring your needs. It's about temporarily setting it aside. So again, my husband and I have an agreement. If we're both in child state, whoever recognizes it first needs to step out and become the adult and nurture the inner child of the other person and speak to them with the compassion and the love and hold the space for the healing and helping them move through it. And, that's not always easy either, because I remember years ago when I would recognize I was in my, ego and child state, but I'm thinking, I don't, my inner child's like, I don't want to be set aside. I want him to become the adult. So I'm waiting for him to recognize it, and it's like, but it doesn't work. It doesn't work. As soon as one person steps aside and becomes the adult, you help the other person find out what's really going on, what is their wound, work through it, and then they can be the adult for you, and you can bring your child back and look at your wound. So that could be a whole other podcast, but that's another part of the work.
Yeah. And so what's available to people when we start changing the dance in our relationships? I mean, I know I've been doing that for a long time too. Like there's so many benefits and rewards awaiting, right?
It's huge.
It might require getting a little bit uncomfortable and being brave, but the rewards are just rich, right?
They're huge.
What do you see?
I mean, if somebody would have told me, if somebody told me, when I was that, teenager, lonely, sad, felt stupid, ugly, the whole bit. If somebody would have told me back then that I would be living this life that I'm living now, like in Colombia, in a custom home overlooking the Andes Mountains with the love of my life and just living really the dream, I would have laughed in their face. Like I would have just thought they were absolutely insane, right? It wasn't possible, but it is. It is possible, because when you start to live your authentic life, and so many doors open. I can't even begin to describe how amazing it is.
So beautiful. So we could go on and on and on,
yes,
but tell us, if people are curious, I know they are, how do they find more out about what you do and what you're up to, and any resources you have to share? Where can they find those?
The best is to go to my website, which is called magnifyyourmagnificence.com. And there's also a tab there called free with a number of different resources, and they can learn more about what I do. And if they want to just hop on a call and talk about their situation and see whether or not we'd be a good fit for working together, they can just go to talkwithmarisa.com and schedule a complimentary call. And Marisa has one S in it. Lots of people like to put two S's in their name, but it's one S.
That's right.
Yeah, so that's the best way.
Awesome. Marisa, thank you so much. It's such a rich, important conversation, and it's part of our everyday life. And I love the work that you're doing to, help people heal this part and create more vibrant relationships. And I'm just grateful for you, and I'm grateful that our paths have crossed. So thanks for being here and sharing your message.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Differently. I hope it stirred your thinking, and I invite you to take one inspired action from something that stood out to you. If you want to hear more conversations like this, hit follow on your favorite podcast app. And if this episode could impact someone you know, please pass it along. Remember, new episodes drop weekly. See you next week.